You have heard his name mentioned throughout the day. Many of you seek his counsel. Many of you understand what he's done for this space and this industry over probably the better part of 3 decades and beyond. He is founder of Bersin by Deloitte, founder of Bersin Academy. We, and on behalf of Carl and everyone at EdCast, consider him a good friend. Josh Bersin, please join us. Thank you.
I want to tell you a little story about Carl. First of all, it's really exciting for me to be here for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's great to hear all these stories and see how this stuff is taking off. It's great to see how EdCast is taking off. Carl came to see me in Oakland, I don't know, a long time ago when he first started in this space because he had this idea that maybe he would make it easier to find learning. And he said, but I don't really want to sell to L&D people. I don't really like them. I don't understand them. I don't want to deal with HR. I'm a tech guy. I'm a finance guy. I sold my company to Visa. And I said, Carl, you're going to have to learn to love these people because they're great people. And he's done it because you're all here. You're obviously having great success with EdCast. I have about 35 or 40 minutes to talk to you. Are you guys willing to sit that long? And tell you about what I think is going on in the space. As you heard, I stumbled into the learning industry myself out of another part of business about 20 years ago and have been through quite a learning curve of my own. And I think I want to give you a sense of what's going on right now and where EdCast and all this fits. The first part, of course, is work. You guys have been talking about the future of work and the fourth industrial revolution. I missed a little bit of this, but let me give you just a couple of thoughts here. Automation is everywhere. It is very common. It's not new. I faced automation in 1978 when I worked for IBM before we had the PC. I won't tell you my stories of the steno pool and how it happened to the display writer and all of that stuff. It's the same thing that's happening now. But what's different now is that as your companies become digital, and we heard about a lot of financial services companies earlier, they don't become technical companies, they become service companies. And what's really happening is all companies are becoming like professional services companies. I know that sounds odd, but that's actually what the data is showing. Is that the more digital you are, the more attached to your customers you are, the more data you have about your customers, the faster you have to respond. If you talk to DBS, I guess a couple of you guys probably compete with DBS in Singapore, they have real-time data about the activity on their website, and they can tell in real time when banking customers are moving off of a page onto another page, and so they have to respond to that. And so if you look at the future of work, from my standpoint, it is all about people. It is all about services. It is all about being responsive and dealing with the data and the information and the customer responsiveness in whatever industry you're in. And what that's done is it's created a huge opportunity for you guys because CEOs are saying, we need skills, we need better engagement, we need better learning technology. You guys figure out how to do it. We don't really know how, but it's up to you. And so L&D budgets have gone up. In the last study of HR technology, the learning technology segment is the fastest growing segment. It's one of the fastest growing hiring areas of HR. And it's coupled with reskilling and engagement and productivity. Most of the companies I go to, I have a number of you, I want to ask some questions a little bit later tonight. One of the first questions I hear from the CHRO is, we have a future of work project, and would you tell me what the future of skills are for my company? And, I can't tell them that. This is a never-ending question that will go on for a long time to come. And in addition to that, we have this, sort of strange phenomenon, which most of you are aware of, which is that in the 12 years of economic growth that we've now been through, I think it's the 12th year next year, productivity has not kept up with GDP growth, economic growth, or your business growth. So if you drew a line of the US, 2.5%, 3.5% GDP growth, productivity growth, 1%, 1.2%, 1.5%, is probably true in France. I know it's true in Germany. I know it's true in the UK. That gap is being shouldered by employees. People working more hours, people taking work home, people working in coffee shops or WeWorks, and trying to reskill themselves. And so what's going on under the covers that I find fascinating is this economic redevelopment of what the economists call really quality of labor. Quality of labor is not just skills. It's also engagement, commitment to the job, and productivity of the workplace. And so there's this coupling between all this reskilling and education that we're doing with tools like EdCast to another big project going on in most companies, which is rewiring to make the employee experience better. And somebody a little bit earlier, a couple of hours ago, made the point that the biggest obstacle most companies have to learning isn't just the technology, it's time. It's attention. It's giving people the mindset that it's okay to take an hour away from your job and spend some time learning something or talking to somebody else or giving somebody else a hand in your job. And that's where this quality of labor is going to come in. So we've got this whole big sort of wind behind us, accelerating the development of our space. And added to that, of course, is this issue that roughly 30%, maybe it's close to 40% of the workforce is now contingent, is now part-time, is now contract. You all have probably seen the data about longevity. Most companies are now have workers with 6 generations, maybe 5 generations in the workforce. People in their 50s and 60s and 70s, they want to reskill themselves too. We're not quite ready for that. A lot of companies haven't figured out that, really issue. So all of this is driving demand for better skills. Now, on the employee side, it's a little bit different. If you look at what's going on and you all run into this when you try to roll out EdCast, most employees and most of the research on the workforce itself comes down to some degree of anxiety. And it's a funny thing, during a time of economic growth, when there's a lot of jobs, we should all be really happy, right? I mean, why isn't everybody happy? The unemployment rate's low, the GDP is going up, the stock market's going up, supposedly wages are going up, but there seems to be more angst and anxiety in the workforce than ever. And the reason for that is two. First of all, when your company is growing and your competitor's company is growing, you're anxious about them. So actually, during times of economic growth, there's a lot of built-in anxiety about the company worrying about keeping up with the peers. And that happens at an individual level. When you read articles about the future of work and robots and AI and people from the World Economic Forum talk about, this obsolescence of skills, it makes you a little worried about, well, I don't know, is this job teaching me what I need to know? Am I getting what I want out of this company? Maybe I should go work for a company where I can progress faster. I have 2 kids in their late 20s. And I know this is all we talk about. Am I learning anything in my job? Do I have a good boss? Is this company going to take somewhere? And so this is one of the reasons that products like EdCast have become so popular, because they unleash this passion of the individuals themselves to reskill themselves on a regular basis. Now, I'm not going to say that's the whole solution, and I'll talk about that in a couple minutes. Just unleashing a torrent of content isn't going to solve your skills problems. It's a little more complicated than that, but there is a pent-up demand for this now that I don't think people understood in the past. One of the other things that's happening in terms of the workforce is the slowdown in the economy. Next year, it's pretty clear from most of the data and most of the CEO interviews that the business climate will be slower. I'm not saying there'll be a recession, but things will slow down. And so a lot of focus is going to be turned internally. How can we reskill people to take better jobs inside the company because we don't have enough money to hire people or we can't find them outside the company? I don't know if any of you read this report I published a couple weeks ago, but we just did a study of hiring of highly skilled digital professionals, like AI and machine learning people and, cybersecurity people and analytics data scientists. And we actually found that it is 6 times more expensive to hire those people on the outside than it is to develop those skills internally. Now, it takes a year to 2 years to develop them internally, but in an economy that slows down, there's going to be more interest and even more investment on building these internal skills systems to build the skills inside your company, where you already have people that understand how your company works, who have personal relationships, know the business you're in, and are a little bit more proven, in their roles. And this is the data on employees. The thing that I think is most interesting about this chart is the part on the right, that almost 85% of employees are basically saying, I got to do this myself. I need help reskilling myself because this company may not do it for me. And that's both good and bad. I mean, that's a good thing in terms of giving them the right opportunities, but it also means that we need to give them more advice and more direction and more, sort of pathways to find themselves to the roles that are the most important to us. Now, one of the things that, I've been noticing in this meeting and most of the sessions I go to and a lot of the marketing that comes out of people in the space is this term reskilling. And I have a little bit of a problem with it. And I'll talk about it in a few minutes. Skills are great, but skills don't make you successful by themselves. And if you look at the skills gaps that come out of a lot of the research by a lot of the skills data providers, yes, technical skills are in great demand, but only about 4 or 5% of the workforce work in technology. 90 to 95% of us consume technology. We're users of technology. We're augmented by technology. So for all of the demand there is for technical skills, there's a much larger demand for what you would call soft skills, or what I would call power skills, these complex skills that all of you have been talking about really all day. It's interesting, this particular report came out of LinkedIn earlier this year, and LinkedIn looked at the most in-demand workplaces in the United States, one of which is the San Francisco Bay Area, where you are today. And one of the things they found, let me ask you, just to guess, what is the most in-demand skill in the San Francisco Bay Area according to LinkedIn? Oral communications. Oral communications, by far. Because as you all know, and I'll show you the data on this in a minute, the most effective skills that you really have in your career have to do with people. It's great if you're a good engineer. It's great if you're a good data scientist. It's great if you can use Excel and, all the tools. But if you can't work in a group, if you can't lead people, if you can't communicate, if you can't sell, if you can't explain your findings, if you can't listen well, you generally are not performing at a high level at work. And so a study came out about 6 weeks ago from IBM. IBM interviewed 4,500 business executives and asked them, what skills do you want in the workforce that you're not getting today? And almost all of them are behavioral skills. And we've heard this from all of you earlier, but I just want to reinforce this, that as you think about your EdCast investments and your investment in L&D, this is the thorniest problem of all. There are no off-the-shelf solutions that are going to build these kinds of capabilities. You're not going to find a library of content that's going to do this by itself. This is something you're going to have to do internally. If you don't believe me, let me just show you a tiny bit of history on this. If you look at wages over time, and this is a study that was done multiple times by different people that looks at job families and the wage growth of different job families grouped into 4 categories. The bottom are what are called low math, low social, low math. But you're like, very routine jobs where wages have gone down. The second most sort of declining wages is high math, low social. Those are actually technical jobs. And most of you, I don't know how many of you went to engineering school, actually went to engineering school. If you work as an engineer and you stay as an engineer, you get a great salary coming out of school, but over time, your salary doesn't keep up with the management, the project leaders, the salespeople, the business executives, the soft skills people in business. And so those tend to decline, whereas the increasing skills are really the hybrid skills, the people that understand both. And that is particularly true amongst young people. In fact, young people now say, and this is actually research from Australia, but it's pretty interesting, I think it's true in most countries, that young people are now saying, and I kind of learned how to code in high school. I have a nephew who was designing computer games in high school. He's now in business school in New York, and he doesn't have any problem with software. I mean, he just grew up with that stuff, but he doesn't know about all these soft skills and working in teams and leadership and management and all those other things. So there's a really big passion out there in the workforce that we have to address on what I would call the power skills or the soft skills side of work too. And in most companies, I like to put it into sort of three frames. One is the continuous upskilling of people in the jobs they're in today, which we all do all the time. If you're a high performer, you're always trying to get better at the role you're in. The second is the reskilling as your role changes. It was interesting when I was at Deloitte and when I did all this research, before Deloitte, developed a very, very strong set of skills in what I would call the batch process of research. Most of you have read a lot of the research I've done over the years. A lot of those studies took 18 to 24 months to do, sometimes even longer. And I realized when I left Deloitte, and I think a lot of you, probably know this yourselves, that's too long. I can't take 18 and 24 months to do research anymore. The world's changing so fast. So I'm going through a reskilling process myself in my career at the age of 63 to figure out how to do research faster. And then there's the people that are reinventing themselves, realizing that the job they're in just isn't going to be the right job for the future. And so all these three things are going on in your company today. The third thing I want to talk about is careers, because you really can't talk about skills without talking about careers. And I thought it was really interesting. I didn't get the gentleman's name here from Genpact, but I want to talk to you about this idea of the developmental assignments. What you really learn from, you saw the 4E model a little bit earlier today, is that a lot of your success in life or your job is the experiences you've had. And you could call that a career development initiative or as part of your skills development. And in most companies, based on the last research I did when I was at Deloitte, almost a third of companies say they are now operating as a network. I noticed that a lot of you didn't raise your hands about Agile, but you don't have to be doing Agile to be in a company that's operating as a network. I mean, really all companies are operating as a network. And as that's happened, we've started to adapt these new Agile tools. And one of the things we've found is that in an Agile organization, this career model doesn't work anymore. This is the old sort of, Ram Charan circa sort of 2004, 2005 model of careers that I certainly grew up with when I was at IBM. And a lot of you have this institutionalized in your companies that, you kind of have two paths. You can go up the professional path or you can go up the managerial path. One of them goes a little bit further up than the other. And you get assessed every couple of years on whichever path you're on, and you decide how to move up that path. The reality of it is it looks a little bit more like this. There's all sorts of random, not necessarily random, but sometimes it is random movement that happens during your career. And I think if you look at the research on the most successful professionals, they move around a lot. They have done a lot of things. In fact, I'm going to show you a book a little bit later in the presentation that sort of really describes this very well, that one of the things people are now finding about high performers is they don't specialize early in their careers. They specialize later in their careers. They do a lot of sampling. They try a lot of things, and they get a lot of sort of scary, frightening developmental assignments at different stages of their life. And some of them they succeed at, and some of them they don't succeed at. And they, of course, learn resilience in that process. And I think if you sort of agree with this, and I think most of you probably believe this, how do we do this in companies? We're not set up for this. We don't really, learning management systems weren't designed to do this. Talent management systems weren't designed to do this. This is kind of a new world. In fact, it really even interrupts the idea of what a manager is here to do. in a lot of the original research I did on talent management many years ago, we really came to the conclusion that the most powerful approach to development was to have a great manager. Because if you had a great manager, your manager would coach you and develop you and help you find the next role and tell you what you could do better. Well, it turns out today, that's actually a little bit less true. Managers don't always know what the best role is for you in the company. They're not always aware of, first of all, they may not even understand how to assess you and your particular needs, and they're busy doing their own jobs, and you may not even work that much with your manager. You may be working with another manager on a team or in an Agile work group who isn't really your line manager. So we kind of have this new world of careers where we have these three circles that are coming together between individual motivations, organizational needs and workforce planning, and society needs. And one of the hottest parts of the HR tech market that I think is really interesting is software that does this. We haven't had tools that do this kind of matching. And I think one of the opportunities for you as a company using EdCast and looking how EdCast connects to all the other infrastructures you have is figuring out how to match the demand for skills and jobs inside of your company, a lot of which is in your applicant tracking system, by the way, it's not in your talent management system, with the talent and skills capabilities and the motivations of your people, which is really a big opportunity. And let me just tell you, and so what's going to happen, and I know this is going to happen because I've been a part of this, is we're going to have a set of tools that are going to make that match happen. These are some of the vendors that are working on this. EdCast is also coming across this as an opportunity for EdCast as a company. Workday introduced a product that they're working on to try to do this, to match the open opportunities inside of your company to the developmental needs and interests and career goals of the people inside your company. One of the interesting statistics that came out of the research I did the last year I was Deloitte was we asked about 10,000 people, how easy is it to find another opportunity inside of your company? And 2/3 of the respondents said it is easier to find a job outside the company than it is to find a job inside the company. And one of the CHROs I was laughing about this with, it was an oil company, and we were talking about how hard it was to move from the oil business to the telecommunications business. And I asked him, how easy is it for people to move? He goes, we never do it. Nobody ever moves. But the best way to do it is if you quit, you can easily get hired back into the other side. Which is, so I throw this out there as something to think about in your capability development. Because this is becoming a really, really robust market for, sort of building in the future. The fourth topic I want to talk about is this problem of time. A lot of you are probably going through, you're in your first year of EdCast or your second year of EdCast, and you rolled it out and you did a lot of marketing, and, it didn't just explode day one. And, we found one group used it and another group didn't use it. And the real reason is not because they didn't like it or isn't a great piece of software, it's they're just already busy. They're already doing a lot of other things. It's this, my wife uses this joke all the time, is you can't put water into a teapot if it's already full. If everybody's busy and they're already getting emails all day, and, I have a piece of research from LinkedIn, which basically says that 27% of employees spend 20% of their time on emails that have nothing to do with their job every week. And people are working extra hours. We've got to find time for them to do this. And that's part of the job that's going on in HR. There's probably another group in your company that's working on the employee experience, and they're running into stuff like this. They're finding out that as much as we love doing what we do in HR, we have, to some degree, created a whole bunch of processes that people don't want to use. In fact, one of the companies that's working on all this stuff that I talked to yesterday, they have a new edict in HR. All processes are bad unless you can prove they're good. No more new processes. We're reducing the number of processes. In fact, this particular company created a tool which they call the process shredder. And what it is it's a really cool survey. I'll be happy to tell you how it works, and give you the name of the vendor. And you can type in a process in your company that you think is wasting your time. It takes that that text input, it shows it to the rest of the people taking the survey and does a quick crowdsource and raises figures out which is the process that's the worst. You want to guess what process was rated the worst in that company? This is a big consumer packaged goods company. Performance management process. So HR was, sort of right in the middle of this. So this is part of the world. But the thing that I would like to sort of, maybe the positive of all this is that if you can cut past the clutter, if you can create the culture, if you can create the followership, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute, it will pay off. Because all of the research I've ever seen, and it's certainly true in my career, is the more time you spend learning, the happier you are, if it's well designed. This was an interesting survey we did at LinkedIn. We had 2,800 people respond. We asked them, how much time do you spend learning every week? And there's a bunch of people that spend very little time, about 45%. There's a bunch of people that spend a medium amount of time. And then there's a small number of people, that little light blue sliver, that spend a lot of time learning. Those guys are happier, more engaged, they're performing better, they feel more confident, they like their companies better. Somehow they have found the time to continuously educate themselves on the job. So we need to really figure out how to give people the time. Okay, so where are we? All of those things are probably factors going on in your company. And along comes EdCast, new tools, learning in the flow of work, AI, automation. How does this all work? So let me give you some things to think about. The first thing is that, how many of you have learning management systems? Okay, how many of you love your learning management system? That's what I thought. Okay. The problem is not that learning management systems vendors didn't know what they were doing. They absolutely knew what they were doing, but they did it in a different time. At the time the learning management systems were developed, the market was a market of management tools for HR, not tools for employees. And the word management, which is the middle of the learning management system's name, is what those tools were. So what we've done since then, and this has been a real revolution in the tech market, is we've basically reached a world where all of the tools we buy, if they aren't immediately useful to employees, it doesn't matter how much you like them. It doesn't matter if you think they're great. It doesn't matter if the HR department thinks they're great. It doesn't matter if the HR tech department. I was just at a very big company yesterday down in Sunnyvale. I won't mention who it is. It's doing a massive implementation of Workday. And they're just getting started. And we went through a bunch of data on the sort of typical adoption issues with Workday. And it was like a 3-hour meeting. At the end of the meeting, they were like sweating because they were worried maybe nobody will use this. Because they know if they buy a system that's going to cost tens of millions of dollars and people don't use it, that's their necks on the line. Well, that's really the world that we're now living in, are the tools useful to the employees themselves? In our space, there's a lot of them. We don't have one platform anymore. You know this. It used to be you could buy an LMS and you're kind of there. You're kind of like mostly have what you need. It is absolutely not true anymore. We now have a market of, many tools. I won't walk you through this chart in detail, but the learning experience platform, which is the upper left, is the most the hottest part of the market. I think the reason the LXP market is so hot is that it relieves the pain of the hard to use LMS. It's basically an unlocking tool to unlock content, which is really the biggest problem most companies have had. But what you're going to find with EdCast or any other tool is that you also need a place to put formal learning programs. Now, I don't know where EdCast is at with the latest level of functionality, but there's capabilities like collaboration within a program, pathing within a program, branching within a program. A lot of the stuff that we built in LMSs that was built on the back end is also needed in high fidelity learning programs. So there's some products there. There's microlearning tools. There's these talent marketplace programs. All of these tools are now hot in the market. And I think the real, sort of framing of this is, in your world, how are you going to address both the learning and the flow of work problems in microlearning and the really capability development problems in macro learning. I think the simple way to think about this is that we need both. It's not one or the other, and don't get excited about one and throw the other one out. And I think we've heard this from all of you, is that they both come together. This idea of learning in the flow of work, let me just take 1 minute on that. I started writing about this a couple of years ago. It just sort of came to me one day that, this is actually the way people do learn. And then I thought, but it happens in different ways at different points in time. If you look at an employee's job, and this is something you'll go through if you do design thinking, they go through a steep learning curve in the beginning of their role, and then they plateau. And then they get a little bored and they don't learn anything for a while, maybe in the 3rd or 4th year. And then if they're lucky, they have a good manager, they get a new assignment, they get promoted, and they go back at the learning curve again. If they have a bad manager or the company doesn't take care of them, they go down and they continue to drop off that curve, and they probably quit or they go look for another job inside the company. What we have to do in the learning world is sort of fill in that gap with different formats and different systems. And if you want to try to make sense of these different offerings of the platforms I showed you earlier, just look at a model like this. In the early stages of somebody's job, they're not going to go to EdCast and educate them on how to do the job. They're going to need some patterned, designed, onboarding, developmental experiences to learn how to do the job. Some of the content will be in EdCast, but they're going to need some program management around that. Later, as they get into the job and they get better and better and better, they'll become much more self-directed. And then when they reach that plateau point and they're saying, you know what, I'm kind of done with this, I want to do something else, they're going to look back for something formal again. And that's really the way I think of this. I mean, some of the research that's been done on sort of the word flow, sort of the psychological term flow is oftentimes equated with ecstasy. Flow is a mental state of just enough what's the word? Just enough challenge. That's the word I'm trying to think of. Just enough challenge that you're really on your toes and you're really enjoying your work. And so what we're really doing with tools like EdCast is we're trying to keep people in that little blue area so they don't bounce outside. They don't get into a situation where I really feel out of control and I really don't know what to do next. Or, I'm really bored and I really need to learn something new to make my job better. So that's another way to think about this. I did some research last year or earlier this year with OReilly Media, which is a very large, provider of tech content. And we went through this model and they did a bunch of looking at the adoption of their content for software engineers. And what they found was it was a pretty obvious model that early in people's careers as a software engineer, as a novice, as they're learning, they want structured programs. They don't want just random videos. They want to know, what do I need to know to become a great cloud engineer? What do I need to know to become a great data scientist? And they're willing to put the time in to go to a physical class or go through a curriculum, to take tests, to do assignments, and do the kinds of things that we did in college. As they become more experts, they want less and less structured content. So this is really the world that we're living in. We also know, by the way, that you don't learn from consuming things once. You learn from consuming things multiple times. Most of you probably know this, but if you haven't seen this research, it's pretty widely distributed in the L&D market. This idea of spaced learning. We've got to take tools like EdCast and make them smart enough so they don't just show me one video, but the next time I come back, they remind me of something that I maybe learned 2 days ago or maybe 3 days ago that's a little bit different, to re-trigger those memory cells that I started the first time I watched this. And so part of the micro-learning or the learning in the flow of work solution is repetition. Repetition at a spaced period of time. This is research that was done in the education of anatomy at medical school, where you have to learn all sorts of stuff about the human body. And they found that repeated study was better than one-time study. Conceptual descriptions of why the body is made up the way it was better than one-time study, but practice and retrieval and asking people questions about programs and getting them to go back and respond to content was the best way to learn. And by the way, that's what we've learned in the academy that I've been building. There's all sorts of content, but there's also all sorts of questions, and you're constantly discussing it. So the learning world of microlearning is really, sort of all about those principles. And of course, it's changed the sort of needs of L&D. Now, how do you bring this all together? Let me sort of wrap this all up into where we are. We heard a little bit earlier about this, this difference between skills and capabilities. There's all sorts of different ways of framing the two. I think what you need to think about is, yes, we need skills, and we are always going to need skills. I don't remember what I was doing the other day, last night or the night before. I was doing something in Excel and it wasn't doing what I wanted to do. And I went on YouTube and I watched a video and I dinkered around and I figured it out. I just reskilled myself. Did I become a better analyst? No, I didn't become a better anything, but I needed that. So this reskilling thing is always there. And we have to accommodate that demand with great tools like EdCast and great content. But I think the bigger problem is the strategic capabilities of your company. And I would give you a suggestion to think about it this way. In most companies, there are a set of strategic capabilities that make your company what it is. For example, sales, supply chain, safety. If you're an insurance company, it might be actuarial analysis. If you're a software company, it's engineering and R&D. And you're not going to build those skills with a bunch of videos. You're going to need a combination of developmental experiences. You're going to need content. You're going to need experts. You're going to need mentoring. You need some degree of assessment. And I think that is what I would call an academy. An academy is a word. I mean, you can call it a college. You can call it a university, whatever you want, that basically represents this idea that we're going to do everything we need to do to develop the skills in this area, to understand the skills in this area, and continuously innovate on what the skills are needed in this area. I sort of tripped across this in several ways. I had a meeting. Is there anybody from Capital One here, by the way? It was at Capital One last year, and we were talking about all the reskilling they were doing in their digital business. And, they were going through what most of you are is, we need cloud engineering and we need cyber people. We need AI people. We need software engineering people. We need project managers. We need UI designers. And they said, we realized we can buy all these courses from all these different programs, but we actually have to institutionalize it as part of our business. And so what they told me, what we did is we took the technical leaders in those domains and we said, you are now the head of the academy. We're there to help you. We're L&D. We're going to help you build this academy, but it's your academy. And so you get to decide who are the leaders of the academy, what are the content and topics that you want to focus on, and what are the developmental assignments and projects that you're going to give people in Capital One to become experts. And it is incredible what's going on there. I mean, I have never seen such an incredibly passionate, energetic, successful learning experience when they built these. And at that point in time, it was called the Digital Academy. I think it's probably changed names since then. This is a book that I read recently that I think is well worth reading if you're in L&D. And it's basically a study of patterns of expertise in all sorts of different jobs, not necessarily technical jobs. And what he explains very, very eloquently is that range is just as important, breadth is just as important as depth. And that by, some of the complex skills of pattern matching and communication and complex problem solving are developed because of the range of experiences you have. And you won't get that in one program. That's why you need something like an academy structure to build those kinds of skills. There are multiple forms of learning. It's not all going to be online. Some of it's going to be microlearning, some of it's going to be macro learning, some of it's going to be face-to-face. I mean, the fact that, 100 or 150 of you came here for 2 days to meet with each other and talk. That is high value. Talking to each other, meeting people, getting to know people. Those are all part of the learning experience too, as is what happens after you leave and go back to work and your manager gives you time to learn or asks you questions, or you have an after action review, or you discuss why something didn't work and you're given time to learn on the job. So all of that is part of this academy idea. I think where we are as a marketplace right now is we're kind of somewhere between green and blue. A lot of you probably were sitting in the orange box, frustrated with your LMS. We did a study a couple years ago and found that the net promoter score of L&D was negative 55 or something like that. And one of the vendors did a study recently, said now it's negative 15. It's a little bit better, but it's still negative. So we've unleashed tools like EdCast, and we said, okay, great, now we're going to make all this content available and everybody's going to be happy. But I don't think we're going to totally get there yet. I think you need to think about moving to this blue box in the areas that are most strategic to your company. I'll give you an example of that. And by the way, this gets back to something I just want to show you that I actually did 20 years ago. When I was first doing research on e-learning, back in the days when e-learning was a new idea, we had this problem of companies buying all sorts of content and having to make a decision of what do we build versus what do we buy. Because at that point in time, it was costing $75,000 to $100,000 an hour to build an hour of content. And so companies were building content themselves before the vendors existed. And then the vendor market took off and we had Skillsoft and all these vendors started to build content. And I came up with this model that I just want to share with you to think about. In every company, all of your content, all of your training issues probably fall somewhere into these four boxes. Some of it is operational. We need it to run the company well. Some of it is strategic. We need it to compete, to win business, to gain market share, to be the best company we can possibly be in the market that we're in. And some of those are off the shelf. So for example, in IT desktop training, for you to build your own training on how to use Microsoft Excel, you're not going to do it any better than a vendor. There's no point in building that yourself. However, the way you treat sales training, there's some elements of sales training that are off the shelf. There's some elements of sales training that are very unique to you. And I think, and I'm not going to tell you what this box looks like for each of you, but if you do a little bit of thinking and go back to your office with your L&D team and take all the training programs you have and put them on this box where they go, you're going to find there aren't that many in the upper right. There's some. And those are the ones that belong in a capability academy kind of structure. Now, I went through this exact conversation with a bunch of companies over the last couple of months, and I've seen people starting to do this. This is a particular example, SEMX, which is a big cement company. I mean, they're actually one of the most successful companies, in that industry. And they're global, and they have aggregates, and they dig dirt out of the ground and they ship it from place to place, and they have all these different manufacturing processes. And the L&D professionals, they've bought all sorts of tools. They've got virtually every piece of L&D technology you've ever seen. And the CEO said to them, you know what? All this IT stuff, all this digital stuff, he says, I don't care if you do that or not. He says, you do as much as you want. The number one thing for me is safety and supply chain. We heard the safety video a little bit earlier from the folks in New Zealand or in Australia. So I want you to make sure we are the safest company in our industry. We have not had a workplace fatality in 5 years or 10 years or wherever it was. That is our brand. And the second thing for us is supply chain. So they went back to the office and they sat around and they said, what do we need to do to build an end-to-end academy of safety everywhere we go inside of SEMX? And they did that. And so that involved an LXP and content and developmental experiences and mentors and business leaders as owners of this. And I think this is something you guys should think about. Last thing I want to talk about, because I know we're a little bit short on time, is the issue of culture. We did, when I was at Deloitte and before, one of the most interesting studies that I did with David Mallon, who's really the guy who did a lot of the work on this, was something we called high impact learning culture. We had been studying learning technology and learning management and governance and tools and all this stuff. And we decided we'd, kind of do a bunch of surveys and interview people about culture. And we found that of all the things that contributed to high-performing, high-learning organizations, culture was by far the most important. And I kind of reached the conclusion at one point that if we stopped doing all this other stuff, forget about all this learning technology and all that, and we built a great learning culture, everything else would probably be fine. And so that's really what I want to just kind of finish with, is that we're in a particularly interesting time in the economy when employers are, in many ways, the most trusted institutions in people's lives. You've probably seen the research on this. We have a lot of lack of trust of political institutions, a lot of lack of trust of the economic cycle and what has it done to the cost of living in certain cities. But people are really expecting you as an employer to be, in some sense, their home, the place they can go, that they will be taken care of, their career will be protected, and they will, in a sense, get the growth that they need. That's the story of Microsoft. I think just as I walked in today, the Microsoft folks were talking about the growth mindset of Microsoft. And that's really the management philosophy that is really today. And that leads to learning culture. And learning culture is these things at the bottom. Does leadership believe in what you're doing? Do we model and reward people for spending time on learning? Do they have time? Do we have action after action reviews? Do we discuss mistakes? Do we have a transparent environment where we can talk about things that aren't working in the company? I mean, I was just in a big meeting with a bunch of last week in New York, in a whole room full of CHROs, and the biggest thing they wanted to talk about was the fact that nobody ever wants to talk about what's not working in their companies. That's a learning culture issue that's kind of a senior management topic. And I think for you guys, as you build these wonderful systems with EdCast and all the other tools that you buy, this has got to be something that has to be at the center. And it does pay off. Companies that do this well, companies that build this trusted relationship with their workers, where the workers feel that they can trust the organization to develop them and give them the capabilities they need to grow into the roles that they want in their lives, do outperform those others. And so you will get the budget to do this. Okay, so I just want to thank you guys for inviting me today. I know I went a little bit long and it is late in the afternoon and there's a lot of content here. But my hat's off to EdCast for building an amazing company and an amazing business. And thank you for inviting me to the session. I don't know if we have any time for questions or... You guys want to, does anybody want to debate or ask questions or? I'm happy to. No? Oh, here's one.
Culture theme has come up quite a lot.
Culture?
Culture. And in your experience, what's really kind of pays the greatest return on investment in terms of how you build that culture of learning?
I think if you're a CLO or chief talent officer or head of training, you're probably more aware of the culture glitches in your company than a lot of your business leaders are. And so I think there has to be a conversation that you have with, so your CEO is saying, we need to reskill, we need to upskill, they're going to say all that. And you need to go back to them and say, well, you're not giving people time. You're not rewarding them. You're not letting them ask enough questions. We're fire hosing some of their conversations about mistakes. And so there has to be this feedback to upper management of what is their role in building this learning culture. I mean, you can do a lot as a CLO. You can do a lot of evangelism. You can build a great learning system. You can, do all sorts of communications and change. But the CEOs have to realize that. I think that's the sort of the miracle of Satya Nadella at Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft was a brutal place. I went up there a lot. It was a high-performing, not a learning culture. He somehow figured out, either on his own or through his own experience there, that the most important thing that was going to transform Microsoft was to become a learning company. And look at their stock price. So So I think there have to be, some conversations through your CHRO or directly with your business leaders that they own the learning culture as much as you guys. We're the facilitators and the architects of all this, but it's really the business leaders that set the stage for, how much learning is going to take place. I don't know if that helps. Easier said than done. All right. Thank you very much.